Hello,
Hello, I'm Mr. Raine.
Mr. Suter.
We are going to talk about how Russia gets involved in a civil war, a war where Russians are fighting Russians over who will control this country. Now, a quick review of where we're at since the last one. The state of Russia is this in January 1918. The Bolsheviks are in control of government with Lenin at the top. This happens after the October Revolution. Shortly after the October Revolution, there are elections that are held, and the Bolsheviks are too weak to prevent these from happening. They're held, and it shows that the socialist revolutionaries are the ultimate winner. The Bolsheviks do not win these elections. There's growing dissatisfaction with the Bolsheviks and their continuing control after the elections of November 1917. This is coming from the left. And other groups who are socialist, who are sort of skeptical of the methods and the intentions of the Bolsheviks, from the liberals, the sort of the moderates who want a democracy and would like to see Russia sort of progress in that ilk, and also from a lot of the old conservative elites who are just still there, who don't like the Bolsheviks, are afraid of them, and disrespect what they stand for.
So, on the first day that the Constituent Assembly is called, on the 5th of January 1918, this was seen by many on the left and many in the moderate centre ground as a time, finally, the parties who rightfully won the November election can take over. However, Lenin, as I'm sure you remember from last lesson, had used his time since October wisely to strengthen his control over the government and the country. We saw this through the various decrees. The November ones are mostly focused on trying to get people to like the Bolshevik government, for example, decrees on land, decrees on work. The December ones are a little bit more insidious. They're trying to get control through terror and legitimizing the Cheka and various other mechanisms to keep people in line. And the first day, and it's the only day as it turns out, is pretty much farcical. What happens is the social revolutionaries spend the whole day complaining that they should be in power, that what Lenin is doing is unfair. The cadets are pretty much barred from coming back in after lunch. And there's a whole sort of shambles with the Red Guards, the Bolsheviks supporting soldiers patrolling the aisles, with Lenin sort of sitting, not even as if he doesn't care, sort of feet up on the desk.
In fact, he lies down on the floor and has a nap in the middle of it all.
And this is all sending a very strong message of the Bolsheviks do not care. There's no reason for Red Guard soldiers to be there unless you are trying to intimidate people. After the first day, the Constituent Assembly is closed permanently when there's a crowd forming, mostly social revolutionaries, who are protesting this outside. The Bolshevik soldiers fire upon the crowd. This already, as we shall see, starts the move towards civil war, as it becomes very clear on this one day alone that the Bolsheviks have little intention to give back power to anyone democratically elected or otherwise. And if you can't ask for power back and you can't get it through legal means, very quickly you end up going towards extra-legal or revolutionary or civil war means.
The Bolsheviks, and now sort of basically barring all other people from the government, have a major issue. Of course, the primary tenet of peace, land and bread, is peace. And we can't forget through this entire time that the First World War is still going on. In fact, the Germans are moving ever closer, as demonstrated by that big, large swath of green. That's how far the Germans had moved into the heartland of Russia. The Russian army, especially after the October Revolution, had largely given up and was defecting, and millions of soldiers were leaving the front at this point. Lenin realized that he needed to make a deal, and it's something he wanted to do, and the primary focus of the new government should be getting out of the war, getting the promised peace, and getting it quickly, because if it didn't end quick, it would result in increasing popular anger against him and the Bolshevik Party, and threaten their ability to seize control any further. So Trotsky, despite being a good speaker, has absolutely no leverage. He can't seem to come to a deal with the Germans, and Trotsky is sent by the Bolsheviks as a representative of the Russian government to try and seek a peace. The Germans knew that they could basically, under the circumstances, that the Bolsheviks had no power. They could get any deal they want, and the Bolsheviks would have to accept. The resulting treaty was a terribly harsh peace treaty for the Russians, and it's known as the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The treaty means that Russia loses approximately 1/6 of its population. 62 million people are annexed from the western boundaries of Russia into the German heartland, and of this they lose 27% of their farmland, 26% of their railway lines, 74% of the vital iron and coal reserves needed to power Russian industry. And this is a massively unpopular treaty, especially amongst patriots, people who on the right who favor continuing the war.
So, what we see, particularly as the opposition to the Bolsheviks and on the left fearing that they are going to take control, and on the right as they see this Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which they see as a fundamental betrayal of Russian patriotic duty, and it makes Russia look incredibly weak. We see the rise of left and right-wing groups opposing the Bolsheviks. It is sparked by the Czech Legion. Somewhat accidentally, the Czech Legion were soldiers fighting on the Eastern Front, trying to get autonomy, that's self-control for the Czechoslovakian nation. They believed that if they went to war with Austria-Hungary, they would be able to, when they win, take the land they saw it was natively Czech, had been taken over and been controlled by the Austro-Hungarians for generations, for hundreds of years, take that back and run their own affairs. Obviously, when Russia goes out the war, they want to carry on fighting, but they can't do it on the Eastern Front. Their plan to go from east to west via all the way through London along the Trans-Siberian Railway. However, accidentally, no one really wants it to happen. Some Bolsheviks try to stop the Czech Legion going in their train all the way towards the east of Russia, so they can get a boat to go to America, go across America, then go across the Atlantic Ocean to go back to fight on the Western Front. A brilliant plan. Some Bolsheviks try to stop them. Some shots are fired, and the Czech Legion basically decide to steamroll their way through with a train with heavily laden machine guns. This, in turn, is followed up by attacks by various right-wing forces who see this as the opportunity to take down the Bolshevik government, who seems to be wanting to bring a socialist utopia, which will obviously destroy any privilege, any class interest, and the world that the rich generals hold dear. And by summer 1918, we see a full-scale civil war. We'll talk in a second about the various sides, but this is not a traditional civil war with one army versus another army. There are lots of people taking their chance to take on the threat of the Bolsheviks while they are seen as weak. And it's almost as if a bit of a dogpile situation. Someone starts on the Bolsheviks, people see the Bolsheviks are distracted and see now it's their turn to try and break away or destroy the Bolsheviks going forward. So the first major group, and probably the largest, although they're not one big group as we shall see, are referred to as the Whites.
So who are the Whites? The Whites simply are the pro-Tsarist conservative forces which try and topple the Bolsheviks. You can equate the Whites with the beautiful, pristine white uniforms popularized by the Tsar Nicholas himself. So they take their colors from the colors of the Tsar, the ones that he popularly wore. Now, who are the Whites? You've got largely conservative pro-Russian forces. These people are split all over the place, and one of the key factors that you need to understand about the Whites is there's not one concentrated area. The Whites don't just come from Petrograd. These people are all over the place. You have some in the Ukraine, which is in the southwest. You have some in the Ural Mountains to the east, and you have some in the Caucasus, which are in the south. The Whites are largely come from mainly rural areas, which contain little industry. You have in the Whites some of the socialist revolutionaries who opposed Lenin. You also have a lot of very motivated generals who fought in the First World War, who hated the Bolsheviks and their ideas of peace, land, and bread, and also, too, who were probably loyal to the Tsar. You have a lot of soldiers in the Whites. Those are apart from a group known as the Cossacks, who are in the south. And these soldiers in the Whites are generally made up of conscripts, people forced into the army, and they're generally unmotivated. And again, the key thing you need to understand about the Whites is they're not concentrated in one area. They're spotted all over Russia.
So already we can see the problems of the Whites. Yes, they have very motivated rich generals who fundamentally hate the worldview of the socialists, but they've got soldiers who are from the same poor background who will benefit from a socialist world, at least more than they did under the Tsarist system. And this, as we shall see, will be a massive problem. That, and the fact they aren't one organised group. Their generals, as we will see, spend as much time fighting, not physically, but politically amongst themselves than they do fighting the Reds. The next group, which is sort of related to the Whites, are the foreign powers. Russia leaving the war meant that Germany could move all its men, about 1.2 million men, fighting on the Eastern Front, and bring them over to the Western Front. Obviously, therefore, the people fighting the Germans on the Western Front do not think this is an ideal option. In their world, if Russia is fighting the war, Germany is distracted. It has to send half its men one place and half its men the other. As well as this, UK, US and French companies had lots of investment, particularly the French, as it was actually, had investments in Russia. And if the Bolsheviks are allowed to continue, they will nationalize them, they'll take them over, and they won't give any refunds to these foreign companies for their investments. And as well as this, Western powers, even America, are fairly conservative, particularly against the ideas of workers' rights. They are worried that communism, if it's allowed to develop and flourish, would spread across to different areas. And it's better to try and crush it while it's weak than to let it get bigger and bigger, and then in turn, once it's strong, spread the message of communism to the working classes in their towns and in their cities. So the foreign powers, therefore, decide that they are going to support the whites to defeat the Bolsheviks. They send some soldiers, some small amount of soldiers, but they don't really get involved. When this war's kicking off, about 1918, the Allies are about to win or have just won the World War I. The British, the American and the French people don't want to get involved in another big war. It's very hard to send soldiers over there who have just survived 5 years of brutal conflict to then carry on fighting in a completely unwinnable, undesirable war
Against a former ally who they had fought with against the Germans.
Absolutely right. So they mostly support the whites through supplies. Britain, for example, sends £1 million, which is a lot more than it's worth today, worth of supplies to support the whites.
Also, you have the Green. Many nationalities existed in the Russian Empire. We had talked about this many times. You got Finns, Poles, Czechs, not Czechs, Finns, Poles, Latvians, Georgians, you name it, existed in the old Russian Empire. And many of these people saw the instability of the Bolsheviks and the instability of the revolutions as a potential time to declare their own independence, to become their own free countries. And many of these nationalities will use the sort of idea that the central Bolshevik government was distracted fighting a war as an opportunity to break away from Russia and declare their independence. Many peasants will also form armies to defend themselves from the Bolsheviks and the whites, interestingly enough. The Bolshevism wasn't necessarily popular in the countryside. And in the Greens, you have nationalities that include the Poles, the Finns, and the Ukrainians. These people are well organized, and they're generally keen and passionate soldiers who want to fight for a cause of national independence. However, generally speaking, their biggest fault, and the reason that they didn't overall help the white cause, is that when they would fight in the Ukraine, they would fight in Finland, but they weren't necessarily interested in marching on the heartland of Russia and taking over Moscow and St. Petersburg. They were basically wanted to get the Russians out of their land, close the borders, and continue setting up their own independent country. And these people make up what's known as the Green Forces.
So already in the Civil War, this is not a conventional one army versus one. We have the whites, which are a mixture of various different factions in different areas, led by different people. We have foreign powers getting involved, but sort of, but not really. And on top of that, we have lots of different nationalities. And even though the Polish and the people from Finland and the Ukrainians all had the same nationalist idea in mind, they didn't really help each other that much. They were only concerned about themselves. So we have a situation where Bolsheviks are being attacked on all sides, but by our enemies who aren't really organized. On the Bolshevik side, we see the Red Army. These are sort of staffed by a mixture of passionate workers who believe in the cause, and as time goes on, more conscript soldiers. Conscript soldiers are people who are forced to fight. Initially, they have very poor equipment and very poor discipline. They are sort of designed as a people's army. Officers will be voted into power, orders and tactics will be decided by committee and they'll be voted on. And so obviously most soldiers didn't want to send themselves into real battle harm's way, because why would you vote for that? In most armies you need someone who sees what the greater picture is to get people involved. So initially there's a lot of desertion and very poor discipline, because if you vote on who's going to be disciplined for what, very quickly, why would you punish your friend for doing something that you would do? And we have over 1 million soldiers desert in 1918. We see this problem in 1918 until Trotsky, who we'll talk about next lesson, Trotsky organizes them, instills discipline, brings in new officers, brings in new orders. And so what we see when Trotsky comes to power, particularly by the end of 1918, is an improvement in the quality of the Red Army. The soldiers stay in the field more. They're led by better generals. They have better equipment. They are more motivated. They fear being caught if they run away. But there are still episodes of indiscipline, and they're all the way through this occasion. Even the Bolshevik communist-appointed officers who are quite good being killed by their men and replaced by people they vote with. So it's not a perfect ninja army. What we're not in this war, we are not talking about two massively powerful armies having a titanic clash. These are two, or more than two, these are several weakling sides, all desperately trying to claw themselves out the mud. And it's the victor is not the person who lasts longest, it's the side that can organize themselves, arm themselves, and discipline themselves the quickest and the fastest and the best. And as we shall see, that's the Bolsheviks rather than their enemies. And this map is a fantastic example of what the war looks like by about 1918, 1919. The red area is controlled by the Bolsheviks, and as you can see, attacked on all sides by nationalist forces, by green forces, by various white armies in the Urals, with Denikin, what's his name? Yakudich even. We have Denikin in the south pushing up, and we have pushing in from Finland as well. So the Bolsheviks at the start of the war are being pushed from all sides. So the war itself is marked by disorganized attacks by different forces against the Bolsheviks. If they had all fought together, they could have crushed the Bolsheviks, but they're not. They are broken up by national grounds. The white generals, even if they all believe are conservative, as we shall see, disagree on who's going to be in charge next. They refuse to help each other. The Greens, once they push the Bolsheviks out, aren't interested in getting any further. The foreign powers increasingly start to question whether the whole thing's worth it. And so the Bolsheviks, although they're getting attacks on many, many sides, are not completely destroyed. No army at this point are well organized, led, and motivated. The Bolsheviks, as we shall see, are made into a far more effective force, and that's partly why they win. But fundamentally, we are not talking about a proper war. These are wars. This is a brutal, scrappy war, rather than an organised modern war. And as we shall see, part of the reason the war is won by the Bolsheviks is because of intrinsic, that's natural advantages, as we'll discuss next lesson, and also the role of Trotsky to basically man up, to improve the Red Army to make it an effective fighting force.
So, in summary, the Bolsheviks felt comfortable enough to close down its main threat, that is the Constituents' Assembly, which had been voted on and therefore was made primarily up of socialist revolutionaries. The closing down of the Constituents' Assembly will provoke many people on the center and the right to take action against the Bolsheviks, especially after they sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which results in massive territorial and economic and financial losses to the Germans. The wake of signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk will lead these opposition groups, the Whites, the Greens, and with the help of foreign powers, to launch a civil war in which they will challenge the Red Army, the Bolshevik army, for control and try and stop the October Revolution in its tracks.
Excellent. Thank you very much.